been thinking a lot about the Thanos snap.
The Thanos snap?
The Thanos
is in
snap.
the Avenger. Okay, yeah, all right, yeah.
Right, from the last two Avengers
I think, did I just
movies.
say Avenger as though it were singular?
Yeah.
Yes, that's like just a dad trying to be involved. What are you reading, son? Avenger?
That's like that line from Arrested Development. Here's some money, go see a Star Wars.
Star Wars!
It was such a well-written show.
I don't remember that joke.
So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the Thanos snap. So at one point in Avengers Endgame, Thanos says that he can wipe out half of all life with the snap of a finger. Yes. And for the rest of the movie, and the entire next movie after that, the whole mission for the Avengers is to keep him from physically snapping his fingers. And I sat there thinking about that because Thanos' power is such that he doesn't really need to physically snap his fingers.
No, he could, as far as I know, with the Power Stones, you could just think it and it's done, right?
Yeah, that's just it. And because he used that idiom, the whole rest of the movie is predicated around keeping Thanos from snapping. And then I thought, thank goodness he used that idiom. What if he had used a completely different idiom?
All right. I already see the comedic potential in this. Go ahead. What are you thinking?
What if Thanos looked him dead in the eye and said, I could wipe out half of humanity in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail? The whole rest of the movie would be them, like Iron Man trying to find mutton by the truckload, and from the looks of Thor in the second half, Thor just eats them all. What if he would have said a completely different idiom, right? I had them all written down here and I can't find them.
Oh, Grandpa's having a moment with his bit. Okay, go ahead.
But what if it was what was it? What if it was completely different? What if Thanos goes, what if I could wipe out half of all life in a jiffy? And then the rest of the movie is them arguing if he should have said Giffy.
I like the idea, though, that, like, Thanos, the inner insecure teenager, he's like, the only thing that could stop me from wiping out half the life in the universe is a sincere, warm hug that made me feel welcome. And, like, the whole movie is them trying to tell him, like, you're an okay guy, here's a hug. No, you shan't hug me. And, Thor, Hulk.
Really, I don't want any hugs.
No hugs for me. But it's also Thanos kind of doing the shoulder, like the hands kind of open for a hug. Like, maybe I would take a hug.
Kind of waggling the eyebrows a little bit at Black Widow.
It is interesting, though, Brad, from a storytelling perspective, you need to make the physicality of a snap, or else that story falls apart. You can't have it be a mental switch where he just literally thinks all life is gone.
They had to do it, but what if... But what if he would have said, I could wipe out all of life in a blink of an eye?
What if it's also...
They're like holding his eyes open.
In true 90s movies fashion, what if it was also like product placement? Well, if I enjoy this delicious Diet Coke, then half the universe gets wiped out. No! Keep Thanos from drinking my Diet Coke!
Somebody get this guy a Fanta!
Hide the refreshing coolness of a diet. Like the product placement is so clear. Hide the refreshing cool aspect of a Diet Coke from Thanos.
Yeah, it's really weird. Thank goodness they went with Snap. Out of all the options, it's probably best they went with Snap.
No, don't let him crunk. He's crunking. No, there goes the universe. On that note, I'm going to say hello. I guess on that note, hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics
and making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. The one thing we didn't talk about since it happened was the temporary halt in voting on the Eisners, by the way.
Where have you seen that?
That is quite a thing, my friend, when there is a data breach like that. That's great.
Weird. Well, you've gotten the replacement email by now, right?
By now we've gotten, and by the way, we record this a couple weeks in advance, so who knows? The winners might have already been announced by this point, but by the time you're listening to this. But as we're recording right now, the Eisners have sent out a new, hopefully more secure website using everyone's previous logins, and has basically said, hey, we're going to start the voting over again. Sorry about that. And that, from what I understand, it's not really clear how much data was breached. But the idea that all of our addresses and emails and potentially phone numbers, and I say this as an older dude who has not been harassed online.
Yeah.
It's not great that has gotten, that's the exact opposite of great, because we have friends who are very much harassed online for their cartooning, and it's a dangerous thing when data gets breached like that,
And they haven't been forthcoming with giving a lot of answers towards that.
No, they have not.
I get that they don't want to talk about it. I get that that's uncomfortable. And I get that they probably legally have to be very careful what they say, because they probably have some attorney whispering in their ears saying, if you say this, it opens us up to that.
The liability,
But at some point, it would make me feel better, and a lot of the people I'm sure listening to the show would feel better if they could get a handle on just the extent of what was breached, so that they can protect themselves.
And, I think a lot of it is, because I'm guilty of this as well. Once you get a website up and running, sometimes it's like just the molasses of like, I don't want to change it. It's working. It's fine.
Oh, and you don't want to because when you it's like nailing Jello to the wall. If you change this, then that's got to be changed. And if you change that, the other thing now it doesn't work and needs to be updated. I get that it's a headache.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that EisnerVote.com hasn't been updated in what looks to me like 10 years or so. It looks like some old software and old graphical user interface. But the problem with that is that there's security problems if you don't update. And anyway, we have no real resolution now. What I imagine, though, Brad, is going to happen is they're going to complete the vote. That'll get done. They'll announce the Eisners, and then a week or two later, they'll probably say, so here's what happened. Don't you think? That's what I think is going to happen.
I would hope that they would, because the other option is that they just try to sweep it under the carpet, and that's not a great. I don't think that's a great way to handle it. But
yeah. I keep thinking of that novel title, Things Fall Apart, because right now, unfortunately, everything in the world is falling apart. Like basic stuff is just like, please work. Like the other day, I went to drill something with my power drill and the damn thing broke. And I was like, come on, power drill. Just not you two. Come on.
You power drill, you were the one tool that I could count on. You just made things spin. It's all I really wanted you to do.
Well, I know that sounds so trivial, but it's like when everything in your life is starting to fall apart, sometimes the basic, like when a screwdriver breaks in your hand, you're like, not you too, come on.
They say that, I mean, I forget where I read this, but it was part of a larger narrative, but it said people usually don't, mentally snap because somebody hit their car or come up and tweak their nose. What happens is all of life's little things build up, and then you're tying your shoes and the laces snap. And that's what sends you over the edge.
Yes,
it's not the big stuff. Yeah. It's the little stuff that comes as a culmination, because all this other stuff is just built up underneath, and you're holding it all in.
And you know what? I think there's something to that, because we steel ourselves against, like, all right, pandemic, I'm steeling myself against that. All right? Possible depression, I'm steeling myself against that. Social injustice, I'm steeling myself against that. And then you're like, shoemace breaks. God damn it, I wasn't prepared for this.
What am I going to do? That's it. I'm going right back to the Velcro shoes like Mom used to buy me when I was 8.
It's just me weeping in the corner over the dang shoelace. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's I don't know where I was going with that, but the drill got me the other day. Anyway, so Eisner votes. It'll be interesting to see where this goes, and it's a shame for this year's. And I don't just say this because I'm on there. It's a shame for this year's crop that. Why are you, Brad? Has the most grandmotherly smile. What is this smile that you're?
Because obviously. And if somebody wins, it puts an asterisk by their name. But I don't want to. I don't want to bring that up, because I hope you win this year, and I don't want you to think that I give you any less credence if you do win.
No,
but it does put an asterisk by one's name now.
It does. But it's anyway. I on a semi-volunteer basis, I just feel bad that I know some of them are professionals in the Eisners, and I know there's a lot of volunteers too, and there's in general at Comic-Con there's a lot of volunteerism for that organization. And just as someone who loves comics, I just feel bad. I don't know a better way to say this. It's just like in general in life right now, I just have a lot of feelings, as I'm sure you do, and I just feel bad that this is happening.
That's just it. It would almost be easier if this was malicious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if this was malicious, if they had purposefully tried to do something underhanded, then this would be easy. You could shake your fist with righteous indignation. But from firsthand and secondhand experience, all we've ever heard from these people are they're great people who love comics, and like you said, volunteers and people whose hearts are in the right place. I would almost wish that they were Disney villains sitting in the corner, twirling their mustaches. It would make this much easier.
You and I, as storytellers, were also on some levels empathetic.
Yeah.
And so I assume there are people in their life that might be sick with COVID. I assume there are people in their life that just got laid off. I assume that they are anxiously going to sleep every night, worried about relatives, right? As are we all. Right. And so, like, they're also at the same time like, how do we keep the Eisners going? And I just feel bad for them that this happened. I know that it is a terrible thing to have data breached. I know that it puts some people at risk. But I just feel bad for everyone involved, and that's where my takeaway is. It's no grand answer to this, but I just feel bad.
Here's the thing that just makes it extra bad. Speaking of everything breaks, this breakdown that we already said, the site was old. The site, it hadn't been updated in a long time for reasons that, again, like Dave said, if you've ever run a website, you know exactly why it hadn't been updated. This problem could have happened any year. For it to happen this year is just extra horrible because already everybody's up to here with trying to just get through life. Going to the grocery store is all of a sudden you've got to plan that trip out and figure out how you're going to do and what you're going to do but if this would have happened any other year, it would have been like, well, geez, that's a bummer. But happening this year, it just makes it 10 times worse.
I know. So my heart goes out to everybody involved in the sense of. And I would just advise everyone that just be kind in the situation because I really do think that everyone's trying their best in what can only be imperfect situations. And I know we might want to go towards righteous indignation, and maybe that's the case. Maybe there was a reason for righteous indignation of being angry about this, but I don't think so. I think it's just, listen, the world's falling apart at the moment and everyone's trying their best is probably what the answer is.
Yeah.
Anyway. On that very not fun note, I should say we have a fantastic guest on the show, Brad, this week, and I'm excited to talk comics with him. But before that, I want to say a huge thank you and a welcome to our sponsors this week of Wacom over at wacom.com, makers of the new Wacom One and Intuos and Cintiqs. But specifically for those that are thinking about it, we would highly recommend, because both Brad and I have one in our studio, the Wacom One. Portable, around $400 price point, fantastic in terms of both professional, pro-am, and amateur use. And so Wacom over at wacom.com and the new Wacom One.
Absolutely. And if you go to the ComicLab Discord channel, which I strongly recommend, you'll see one of our backers, Dave, has bought, I think, a Cintiq 22 and is currently showing it off. The latest update was they posted an image and they were working on their comic on it. And they said now, and I love this comment, now they feel like they finally become an official cartoonist. and like we always say on this show, you don't need anything to feel like an official cartoonist, but but I do resonate with that idea of, oh man, I feel like I just leveled up.
Yeah.
Because I've had that feeling too.
Absolutely. Well, Brad, the light is blinking, so let's welcome our guest onto the show. Let me hit a switch, turn a knob, and here we go. Well, Brad, I'm super excited to welcome onto the show. We are super excited to welcome onto the show Terry Blas of terryblas.com, and that's TerryBlas.com, terryblas.com. Terry, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this, to be here.
And this is my first time I get to talk to you, Terry.
Likewise, I'm very glad I'm speaking to you. I've heard your voice many times through your podcast.
It's so nice to meet you.
Now, just out of curiosity, Terry, does the face match the voice? And now that you're seeing him,
I think so. Yeah.
listen, Terry.
I so put you on the spot, Terry. I'm sorry.
If you're going to start the show with an insult, we're going to have real problems.
The fact that you view that as an insult says more about you than it does about me.
I know, Brad. There's a lot of insecurity. I think the word handsome was right on everyone's lips. That's what was right on the edge of everyone being said, Brad. And you internalized that as an insult. Anyway, Terry, thank you for coming on the show. I am super excited. Terry and I, Brad, first met a few years back at Emerald City Comic Con.
Time doesn't mean anything anymore.
I know.
No, it certainly doesn't.
I know it's true that we're living one eternal day now. I mean, you know how some personalities in comics you just tell you like right away?
Yeah, you just hit it right off with
Yeah,
it.
Terry has a kindness, both in, I actually would say, Terry, and I hope you take this as a compliment I intend, that you have a kindness in your art as well.
Yeah.
Your art has a humanity and a kindness that comes through, and I think that is actually one of the nicer things we can do with our art is to express love of fellow humans and kindness, and your art is riddled with kindness. So that also comes through in your personality. But anyway, welcome to the show. Didn't mean to unload too much on the first sentence there, but so Terry, when we first met, we chatted a bit about like your route in comics, but I don't know much about your beginning days in comics. And so it's always fun to hear what were the comics that sparked you as a kid into a love of comics, wanting to do comics. And there.
As a kid, I discovered Calvin and Hobbes, like I think a lot of other people did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I also the comics that were in the back of Disney Adventures magazine, and those ended up, I mean, there were several, but the one that ended up really kind of imprinting with me was Bone.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, I own everything Bone now. I have a Bone stuffed doll. I've got the figurines. I've got it all. But
oh, wow. You've got the figurines? Wow,
I've got little
great.
figurines. And, yeah. But those really imprinted on me because I think they were, I've said this many times before in like other interviews and stuff, but I think, you know, comics and cartoons are, I think, something in the United States that are still viewed as entertainment for children, whereas in other countries, they aren't sometimes. And it was interesting for me as a kid to see these cartoony looking, you know, comics that looked like they were intended for children, but that dealt with deeper kind of themes and ideas.
Yeah, yeah. Just out of curiosity, Brad and I have talked about this before, but why do you think the U.S. and Canada, to some extent, keeps comics in that sort of pen as for kids only, or this is a product for kids or intended for kids? Just out of curiosity, in your mind, why do you think culturally that happened here versus in Europe?
You know, I don't know. It's kind of always been baffling to me, but I think I could have something to do with maybe the fact that like comic books were inexpensive, so they were easier for children to afford and buy.
Yeah.
You know, and so then they were seen as these, you know, people used to call them funny books, like as these like this light entertainment. Cartoons, I think, because most kids love to draw, I think kids are drawn to cartoons and their vibrancy and, you know, and whatnot. And so I think people will tend to be like, all right, I'm going to put cartoons on for my kid since it captivates them. And then it could have mutated from there. I don't know.
No, I think there's something to that. That's true. So, teenage Terry, what were those years of comics for you, or was there a period of drifting away from comics and coming back, or what was the teen and 20 years?
So, how standard is this response? As a kid, as a teenager, I was a teenager when the X-Men cartoon aired, right?
The X-Men animated series.
Yes, this is cueing Brad singing the theme song. Go ahead, Brad. Right. Get it out of there.
So here's
one
a fun
of the
little
best
fact.
theme songs of all animation right there.
I still need someone to do a mashup of Whitney Houston's "Whatever You Want From Me." I'm giving you
my
everything.
God,
that's right.
Oh my God, I never put that together.
I mean, I'm gay, so I put that together real quick. But I discovered that. I watched the whole series, and that actually led me to go, well, this is based on a comic. What are the other adventures that they go on? So the first, single issue floppy that I purchased was an X-Men Adventures comic book, which was like a retelling of one of the episodes. And it had Rogue on the cover, like about to beat up Pyro. And from there, I started purchasing like the Jim Lee run of X-Men and reading that. And I got sucked into all of the X-Men stuff. I also discovered I was at the perfect age for like the cliffhanger stuff. So like Battle Chasers, Crimson, Danger Girl, Gen 13, kind of those comics.
Yeah.
And I just devoured those. So yeah, I really loved those and didn't really as a teenager sort of even conceive of the idea that comics could be more like autobio or educational. Like that didn't kind of cover anything in my mind, but which is funny because that's sort of what I do now.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what I was just going to say, is that you're known for that series that you did on Vox.com, where you talked about the difference between the term Latino and Hispanic, for example. And there's a lot that you do that's both autobiographical and educational. What threw the switch in your mind that one could go from one thing to another? What threw that autobio switch?
So I was really inspired by a few comic artists who I saw doing autobio stuff. One was Emmy Lennox with her book Emmy Town. And another was my good friend Natalie Noragat, and she had done a book called Between Gears, which covered like one day per page of her whole college, life. And at the time, I really wanted to do something autobio, but I was not out to my parents, who are Mormon. Right. So I couldn't do autobio and be honest, because I didn't want my parents to find out I was gay through like a comic on the internet.
Right, right.
And so eventually, the story goes, I came out to them and whatever. And then living in the whitest major city in the country, I encountered a lot of people who didn't know the difference between the terms Latino and Hispanic.
Right. Yeah.
And thought, well, I could do a little comic about this and talk about sort of my upbringing and how I consider myself bicultural, biracial. My dad is, from Idaho, and my mom is from a little town outside of Mexico City. And so growing up,
that's a story right there, by the way. Well, Idaho and just outside of Mexico City. That's all.
I'm working on an autobio book. We'll get there. But she's from a town called Ameca, which is about an hour and a half outside of Mexico City, at the base of a volcano. It's so you've probably heard of Puebla.
Yeah.
And Puebla is at the base of a volcano called Popocatépetl and Ixtaccíhuatl. There's two volcanoes there. And on the other side of the volcano is my mom's hometown. Yeah. But
just quick sideline. How active is that volcano? Just out of curiosity, or is it super dead?
All the time.
No, Terry, never go visit relatives.
Well, I haven't been in quite a while. My mom visits all the time. And she, when I was little, she would come back with like a little vial of ash, because it snows ash.
Oh no!
So yeah.
Jeez. All right.
Right. Anyway, but I forgot where I was going with that tangent.
I don't know. I'm so sorry to sidetrack you.
No, that's fine. The Latino Hispanic thing. So growing up, I grew up in between Boise, Idaho, and then a bunch of different cities in Mexico. And so it was interesting to me to sort of encounter many people here who didn't know the difference. And I thought, well, I'll just make a little mini comic, talk about my upbringing and why those terms are different and what they mean to me. It was a quick lesson in like, oh, I did a 6-page mini comic, and there are going to be a lot of people upset because this isn't like a 60-page dissertation on the subject.
Right.
So that's sort of how that came about. That was what got me, I think, noticed by a lot of people because of that. It got
spread different parts of my, what's the way to say it? Social media feeds.
Yeah.
It would come across in different ways multiple times.
So I credit that with a friend of mine. Her name's Claire. She's Claire Hummel. She's known for like the historically accurate Disney princess illustrations.
Right.
So when Tumblr was a thing, she reblogged my comic there, and I woke up to like 25,000 reblogs.
Wow.
And so I think that's what got it known. And then Vox.com contacted me asking if they could run it. And then from there, I said, let's do some more comics together. So I did another one called You Say Latinx, because I found a lot of people don't know what that term means either.
Right.
Because for a lot of Americans who only speak one language, the idea of a language being gendered is like this crazy, insane thing they don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, the moon is a woman. You don't get. So, that there's different words for the, depending on masculine, feminine. So to do a comic about You Say Latinx and to say this is just a term that gender fluid and gender non-binary people can use and still feel included was important to me, because so many people, I think, within the Latina community seem very reactionary to it.
Yeah.
as like, well, I'm not going to say that. And it's like, well, if you don't identify as gender non-binary, you don't need to identify yourself with an X. It's fine.
Right.
But my latest comic with Vox was about speaking. People who get upset when they hear a language spoken in the United States that's not English.
Mm-hmm.
And that was important for me in an autobio sense because it was something that I now experience. Like I've never had someone scream or yell at me, but I speak in Spanish on the phone to my mom. And she, after coming out, we had somewhat of a strained relationship, but now we speak quite a bit. So I was on the Portland streetcar and answered the phone and said, hola mamá, ¿cómo estás? ¿Qué estás haciendo? Whatever. And someone looked at me kind of weird. And so I had a moment of like, oh, is this, do I need to start recording? Is this going to happen to me?
Yeah.
And I was like, if you think you're about to mess with an angry gay Mexican who's seen every episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer at least 5 times and that you're going to win, you're not. And so I realized, like, on the flip side of that, my mom is, a tiny Mexican woman living in Boise, Idaho. And if she's on the phone talking to me and she's at like the grocery store, I don't want someone to, react the way to her. So I felt like this was a strong sort of topic I could cover and have be educational while at the same time being autobio. Because the United States doesn't have an official language.
Right.
It doesn't. Like,
wait, is that true? We never have declared?
Yep, they've never declared an official language.
Oh.
And there's a lot of push between, and see, I love the idea of like, write what you know, but I also love the idea of write what you want to know. Because by doing these comics, now I understand a lot more that there are, Republican right-wing senators who are attempting to make English the national language with the excuse that it will help immigrants assimilate better. Because of paperwork, I guess.
Right.
And, maybe it would. But at the same time, it's like, we're one of the only countries, I think we're probably one of the only countries that doesn't teach or force, students to really learn another language. It was sort of shocking to my husband that, like, when we went to Mexico City for a trip, all of my friends that I had made online that he met there spoke English. And he was like, what? I was like, they teach that in school here.
Right. Well, the funny thing about anyone who speaks a second language, and it's always interesting mentally to play this game, is that, a lot of people will assume, they're not very smart because they're stumbling their way through English. Well, the thing is, not only do they know every word you know in a different language, they know 10, 20, 30,000 words in English additional to every word you know in another language. What I'm saying is they are actually smarter than you in when it comes to linguistic arts. And yet your perception is like, if you're a racist person, is to be like, they're a dummy or whatever it is. It's like, no, they actually know more than you.
It really bothered me growing up because my, not so much anymore, but my mom had a really thick accent. And at home, where she would speak Spanish, I found her to be so funny and so bright. And so interesting. And then when we would go out in public, it was like people viewed her as none of those things.
Right.
And I didn't like it. Anyway.
Can I tell you, my grandmother-in-law, same thing. In Spanish, hilarious. Like, could bring down a room. So funny and warm. And yet, you could see her mute herself in public. Yeah. And it always broke my heart because she was intelligent, she was witty, she was insightful, she had the best advice of anyone I've ever met in my life. And yet the English-speaking world didn't get to see that because she felt she needed to mute herself by the world that judged her on it. And so I know exactly what you're talking about with that regard. I'm sorry, Terry, I cut you off. You were going to say.
Oh, you're fine.
Well, okay, so let me jump back into 90s X-Men keeps you going through high school. That brings you into the comic world, and then college and beyond. What was that? Well, first of all, you decided to go to art school, right? So talk us through that. What was that journey like?
So it took a long time to get to that point, but because I had been living in New York, as a Mormon missionary in the Bronx, and then after that, I moved to Santa Clarita, and lived there for a while. I was attempting to apply to like Cal Arts or, school there. And then I felt like this is too expensive for me. And I had a really good friend who was already drawing comics in Portland. And she influenced me to move to Portland saying, it's cheaper. It's closer to Idaho, which, if you're going to visit your family. And she had gone to PNCA, which is Pacific Northwest College of Art.
Okay.
And so it was one of those things where, she flew down, we drove up to Portland, I stayed with her and all until I found a place. And a week after I moved to Portland, I somehow all in the same week got a job, got an apartment, and I got into art school. So I was like, I guess
that's a big week.
That's a big week.
I was like, I guess it's meant to be. So I started going there, and I studied illustration. And at the time, there wasn't many comics instructional courses.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I thought, well, if I'm going to draw comics, you got to be able to draw everything. So I may as well just do illustration and learn how to draw everything. And because of that, I started college. I went to college for a year at the University of Idaho when I was 18, 17, but didn't finish that because I moved to New York. And so when I started college again at art school, I was probably, I think, 25, and everybody else around me was 18.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was at a point where I was like, art school's great. It's fine. I want to be here, but I also want to get my degree and leave.
Yeah.
Having learned as much as I could. And it was eye-opening to me that arts, I felt like there was a big difference between someone who is dedicated to being an artist, and this is going to sound terrible, and someone who won most artistic in high school and whose parents paid for them to go to college.
Yes, and who at that point in their life might not necessarily even know what they want to do.
Exactly.
They're just like, this is the next step.
And
kind
so
of thing. Yeah.
because I come from a military family, my father's a retired colonel, I viewed the first year of art school as boot camp. And I said, how many people are not going to be here next year?
Mm-hmm.
And I looked around, and half of them, if more than half, were not there the next year.
Yeah.
And so for me, I feel like I got a lot out of art school because I put a lot into art school. I told my mom once, I was like, Mom, just because you go to school, it doesn't make you smart. Just because you go to church, it doesn't make you a good person. So it's what you put into it.
Which one of those two statements did she have the bigger problem with?
Take a guess. But that was my whole point, was I'm going to put as much into this as I can so that I can reap the benefits. And I feel like I got a lot out of art school because of what I put into it.
Yeah. Well, can I pause you for a second, because I've never come across someone who went to art school, not that you were old at the time, but older.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like, Brad, that could be a key difference for what we might recommend for younger people, is take a minute,
Yeah.
Maybe take a couple years, work a job for a while, and make sure you want to be an artist, because Terry's right. The fact that you probably, I can imagine you versus the 19-year-old in your class. You're probably up late working on the drawing, and the other one's watching SpongeBob and also barely doing the assignment.
Right.
I can imagine that would be a key difference in going through art school. Is that just a couple years difference?
Yeah.
And desire to be an artist. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's not to say that someone who's 18 or 19 can't put in the dedication and know who they are and what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, the idea is to solidly put into your experience what you want to get out of it. I told myself, when I get a homework assignment, I'm going to do it right away. Right away. Even if it's due in 2 weeks. Because then throughout the week, you have, 6 more classes and you get 6 more assignments. And so finishing them right away and being organized, I think, is what helped me, get through art school in a sane way.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, let me transition, because art school is a good jumping off point, because I would like to talk about your art style for a second. And by the way, if you haven't looked at Terry's art style and you're listening in, you can follow on Twitter or Instagram, again on his website as well, but it's TerryBlas on Twitter and Insta, right, Terry?
Mm-hmm.
And so you can have a look while we're talking on at Terry's style. But one of the things that I didn't hear you mention and especially given the time you grew up, did manga at any point enter your reading world?
Oh, I don't know,
because
how I
feel like a strong manga influence in your work that I find really endearing, and I was curious that I didn't hear any manga come up.
So I will say, I was mainly speaking, I guess, before about American comics, but when I was 16 years old, I discovered Ranma 1/2, and it blew me away, because I was like, this is about a boy, but he can turn into a girl, but he's not really a girl because his brain is the same. It was just nuts.
Right.
And so that threw me into a Rumiko Takahashi, tailspin of Urusei Yatsura and what was the one with the dog, Inuyasha, and all these series that she had done, and I started learning a lot about her. And And so I wouldn't say that manga so much like as a like genre, I guess, like influenced me, but definitely Rumiko Takahashi and her. I had whole notebooks filled with like Ranma 1/2 characters.
As an individual artist.
Yeah.
Because I hope you don't mind me saying that I see a through line in your work that has a bit of that influence in it, and I was curious that I hadn't heard you mention it. So
I do think it's kind of strange that like if you look up my artwork, like if it's a single image illustration, like I guess like one of my more well known pieces is this Aztec Wonder Woman that I drew, and it's I wouldn't say it's like photorealistic, but it's like a more realistic drawing, as opposed to my comics, which when I do mini comics are very cartoony and sort of manga-y and round and simple.
Right.
And so I think my style is sort of all over the place, but I don't know. I think it's okay.
No, but I think one of the things that I think manga did well and that Tintin did well, and maybe manga actually a little bit sprung off of Tintin, is that ability to within one title go from very caricatured, iconic drawings and then very realistic drawings. And American comics never really did that. Tintin did that.
Calvin and Hobbes did that a little bit.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yes, that's actually a good point. Calvin did that in a very Calvin way. But yes, he did do that.
You're making all sorts of connections for me I didn't consider before, because Bone did that too, with these cartoony characters and these intense backgrounds. And,
and then they would zoom in. Jeff would zoom in on a sword or something, and it would be incredibly... You're right.
Yeah.
Man, Terry, we're finding a through line through all of these. This is... But okay, so with your art, one of the things that I gravitate towards in reading through your stuff, and by the way, I don't know if you know this, but your books were passed around the set of One Day at a Time.
Oh my God.
And were read very lovingly by that cast and crew. So the what was I going to say? The your style is very welcoming in the sense that the line is not. I don't know how to describe this. It's warm and welcoming in a way that, like I was saying earlier, is deceptively simple for a much deeper meaning and a much deeper storyline. And what I think is so effective about comics is that way that comics can make you drop your guard a little bit emotionally.
Yeah.
And this is speaking broadly of all comics. They can make you drop your guard thinking like, I'm about to be entertained, and then hit you with a really impactful and moving story. And your comics do that really, really well. And I was curious to ask you about your conscious choice of the level of detail, if that makes sense for a story. Like, I'm going to make this level of iconicity. I'm going to make this level of realism, because you seem to choose very purposefully in my mind. And I would love to hear you talk about that for a second.
Sure. Usually if it's me like narrating something in a panel and it's an image of me, I don't want to draw myself a million times. So, it'll be much more cartoony. Now I just kind of draw my eyes as like two dots. And part of that has to do with what you said about, I think, drawing people in. The more cartoony something is, isn't that, Scott McCloud explained?
Right.
Like,
the more universal it becomes.
The more people can relate to it. Yeah. But if it's a moment of like, there's a panel of, when my mother, gave birth to me, I'm going to draw an image of her holding a baby, and it's supposed to be more of like a tender moment. So I'm not going to make it super cartoony, I suppose.
Right.
And I think that just has to do with like, I think the choices of what you're showing and what you're telling. I did another in my it was in my language comic. There's a panel of me as a missionary in the Bronx talking to a few people. And so I want people to recognize this is the Bronx. So I draw a train station, a subway platform, and certain things a little bit more, I guess, accurately. But I think I can still maintain sort of some of that cartooniness within the characters, I guess, like Bone.
Right.
So yeah, I think it just depends on what I'm showing, what I'm talking about. Yeah.
It's funny. I never vocalized this before, but one of the interesting things about Bone, and it's funny that we come up in this context of Scott McCloud's iconicity to realism argument, is that you literally could not make a more iconic character than one of the Bones.
Oh yeah.
And yet they were in hyper realistic situations. So it's the universality of like anybody could be Bone in this moment. Like we're all there right there with Bone going through this adventure, but it's incredibly detailed and realistic, and frankly for a kid, a harrowing adventure. Sorry, I don't know why I'm vocalizing this just now. It just occurred to me that how universal Bone is.
Yeah.
That might be why we all really are drawn to. Like Bone's face is 2 circles.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. It is, and literally the complete lack of, it's the absence of color. It's whatever you want Bone to be.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a good note for younger cartoonists out there that might be listening. The universality versus the realism approach in your cartooning. So let me to finish up the conversation today. I want to talk about a future project that you have coming down the line, Lifetime Passes. Can you give us the quick elevator pitch and share that with folks and what's going to be coming up?
I pitched a book to Abrams, which they picked up for their new imprint called Shirley Books. And that's being headed up by Mariko Tamaki. She's my editor on this book, Lifetime Passes. What I can say about it, I guess, is that it's a book about teenagers in the summer who go to a theme park and discover a secret that leads them to spend time with the elderly. I'm trying to choose my words very carefully.
What's funny is how, like, in you trying to carefully choose your words, it vaguely sounded creepy. Spending time with the elderly.
to take them to the park. To take them to the park.
To take them to the park.
That book is I wrote that script, and that book is being drawn by Claudia Aguirre, who is a Mexican artist. She also illustrated my book Hotel Dare, and yes. I love working with her because she's so great, so fantastic, so fast. And that is my next project, which I think the artwork is starting on that right about now. So it'll be a little while before it's out, but that's my next sort of big project that I'm really excited about. It's actually the first graphic novel idea pitch I had, which is funny because my first book, Deadweight, was my first book that was published. It was sort of I guess it's a quick little story where I pitched Lifetime Passes to Oni, and they were like, "We like this." And then I just had a conversation with an editor where I said, I have another idea for a book, but it's not really developed yet. And she was like, "Well, what is it?" And I was like, "Oh, it's a murder mystery set at a fat camp." And she's like, write that. She's like, let's put that on the table. And so they picked that one up, and I hadn't even I literally went home and was like, "Oh, they're like looking at these pitches in 2 days." Okay. Yeah. So then I just started typing as much as I could for 2 days. And that book I co-wrote with Molly Muldoon, and the artwork is by Matthew Seeley. But I find it interesting that I guess I have an illustration degree, but the bulk of my comics work now is writing.
Yeah.
Right. Why, just out of curiosity on a human level, why do you think that's happened?
I know exactly why that's happened.
Okay.
I took a real hard look at, this isn't putting myself down, but I felt like I took a realistic look at what my strengths were and what my weaknesses were. And I said, I can't, nor do I want to draw bicycles, cars, and buildings ever. And I can't, I'm just not, my strengths are in portraiture, in people, in animals, character, and in, you don't necessarily, it helps to be a good artist, but you have to be able to tell a good story, in comics.
Right.
And people kept telling me that I tell a good story. So I thought, well, I love organizing. I love details. I love coming up with the story ideas. I feel like I can see a whole vision for a project. And I thought, I'm going to try my hand at writing then. And so having gone to art school, I was like, well, I can't go back to school for writing. What do I do here? And so I'm a big proponent for, if you want to go to art school or college, great. And if you don't, also great. But then educate yourself in a way that you feel is helpful to you. So while I was drawing comics, I listened to every YouTube tutorial clip on writing and writing comics that I could. And I said, YouTube will be my college. YouTube will be my...
Wow. This goes back to what we were talking about before, Brad, about self-starters versus art school. I mean, and Terry is both. He both went to art school and is a self-starter.
And see, I just had a conversation with my friend Natalie, who did Between Gears. She storyboards for Disney now. And the value of having people work for you and with you who bring different experiences and backgrounds to the table is priceless, because if everybody that you work with went to art school, that's sort of one experience, as opposed to somebody who didn't, who has different life experiences that could bring something interesting to your story, or a different experience in the way they draw.
Now, Terry, I got to ask you this. Coming from somebody who says, I didn't want to draw bicycles and cars and buildings, which, by the way, resonates with me like you wouldn't believe. and then turning and putting a lot of steam behind writing. When you're writing a story, do you make sure to put lots and lots of bicycle, cars, and buildings in there?
Just to turn the knife.
It's the first thing I do. No.
So everyone look for Terry's new story set in a bicycle factory. It's going to be a real.
It's called Bikes, Cars, and Buildings. Bikes, Cars, and Buildings.
And everyone is a horse. All the characters are horses.
No, actually, I will tell you what I find funny about writing and the Bikes, Cars, Buildings thing is that the script for Deadweight literally says like, panel 5, the kids walk into the woods. And I'm writing a project right now that takes place in New York City. Mm-hmm. And it's like on the corner of 39th and Fashion Avenue in Manhattan in 2016. It's like so much reference that is specific to a year and to a place that I have to gather and make sure I've got really good reference for this artist.
Right.
Because I am writing like, well, now they're in, the Village. Now they're in Brooklyn. And, and so it's very different than the kids are in the woods.
Right.
Yeah. It's very, and did you, as a writer, feel the need to gather all the reference to forward on to your artists?
I do that just...
or is it more for you for your writing?
It's both. And I will say that it's because, one, I'm a very impatient person, and I know that about myself. So if I can give the artist as much tools as they can, as they need or they can get, so that they don't have to search for stuff, then great. I'll create a folder and reference for them. But at the same time, my scripts are very specific and very detailed. And I tell the artists that I work with, this is just the best way for me to get the story out of my head. Right. And so if you and the editor think of a better way to do this page, as long as the dialogue and story still comes across, I don't care.
Yeah.
So I don't want you to feel super beholden to it must be 6 panels with this and this and this.
Right.
That's just the way I see it. And that's the quickest way I can write a script to get it out of my head.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah. I get it. It's I want to say though that in my younger days, I always wanted to be a cartoonist because they're the antisocial part of my personality really loved being able to work and control my own thing, my own story in a compact way that I didn't rely on other people. But as I've gotten older, I just want to say that I really resonate with your comment about there's such value in working with other people and in their own experiences and voices coming in on a shared piece of art. And I will be honest, it took me getting older to accept that might be better or valuable. And it's interesting that we all have our own journey on that, that we were all, I think I can say for all three of us, we were probably insecure kids that were shy and took to drawing because we could, compartmentalize in our little corner of the house and draw. Yeah. But it's lovely once you get to a point when you're older in life to be able to work with a colorist or an inker or a writer and bounce ideas off of. There's something sort of magical once you do get to that point. It's really, it's quite lovely. It's
exciting seeing another artist interpret sort of, what you had in your head. And I forget often that since I'm a writer, but started out as an artist, I can also draw a sketch for the artist and say, this is what I'm thinking for the character. Right. I forget that all the time, but when I'm writing, I do think that subconsciously, having started out as an illustrator and drawing comics helps me write a script, knowing that it's going to go to an artist and what they might, need or what they might be, what might frustrate them, know. And so I do think that's helpful, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, Terry, thank you so much for coming by. It is delightful to talk to you. And I want to say to anyone that has not yet checked out Terry's work, make sure you go to TerryBlas.com, or you can follow Terry Blas at Instagram or Twitter. And you can also search for Tony's work. Tony's work. What the heck? When did you become Tony? That's a weird show. Okay, you're now Tony. Yeah, Tony, there we go. It's a very different life story for you.
Down Tony Blas real quick.
Someone quick, go register that one. You can search Terry's work over at Vox.com. And real quick, by the way, because I'm realizing for our listeners that are in Australia or New Zealand or something, can you give a 2-second version of the difference between Latino, Latinx, and Hispanic? Because actually, I'm realizing that might be fun for people to realize the difference.
So I will say, to preface this, that it's a very basic, simple explanation that you could also get into a discussion about for hours and hours. So the basics for me is that if you think of it if you think of the term Latino as Latin America, as geographical, then Latino is someone who comes from a country within Latin America. Hispanic or Spanish is someone who comes from a country whose language is primarily Spanish. So the difference there being that in Latin America, you have a country like Brazil that they speak Portuguese in.
Portuguese, yep.
So many people that I know who are from Brazil say, well, I'm not Hispanic. I don't speak Spanish, but I'm Latino or I'm Latina.
Right.
And so then you have Spain, which is a country on the other side of the world from us.
Yes.
Right.
And they speak Spanish there, but they're not a country in Latin America. So that's sort of the flip side of that.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And so, you can argue about the true meanings of what that means till, I guess the cows come home. But that's sort of what my comic explores, is those two terms. Latinx is, it's a more recent term that, like, I guess within the past 15 years that was sort of created in the States, that is a term that's used to be more inclusive for gender non-binary and gender fluid people because Spanish is a gendered language, like many Latin-based languages.
Right.
And so I guess you have niño for boy, niña for girl, and then you have what? Like for someone who's gender non-binary or,
right.
And so the term's somewhat controversial because people say, well, X makes the term inconjugatable, the Spanish inconjugatable. It makes, you can't say lixis niñixes, like you can't speak that.
Yeah.
And so my comic explores the idea that I encountered, I had no idea, but a friend of mine in Mexico City hosts a drag competition on YouTube. And instead of saying bienvenidos a todos, which is welcome everyone,
right,
but still using the masculine form for everyone, it's not inclusive because for groups in Spanish, you use the masculine form.
The masculine, yeah.
Instead of bienvenidos a todos, he said bienvenides a todes. So he used an E.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
It blew my mind.
I've never heard that before.
Bienvenidos a todos. And so apparently a friend of mine who is from Brazil said, oh yeah, we've been using the E there for a long time. so
I have literally never thought of E as an alternate for Spanish.
Yeah, so a lot of people have started saying Latine instead of Latinx because you can't, because you can say niñez.
Yeah,
it's conjugatable.
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain is exploding because I've never thought of this before.
It exploded my brain too. So my comic explores that.
Wow. I'm going to go read up on this because I literally never thought of this. Now I want to apply this to a bunch of, because Brad, as you know, there's every word like la mesa, everything in Spanish is, as is true with a lot of romantic languages, has gender. And Terry, I never thought of this about using
a whole
E.
other vowel there you weren't using.
I know. So, we're gonna have a half-hour after show with Terry. We're gonna go through nouns and just think about what could be.
I mean, just imagine one of your grandparents tells you that they think that they're gender non-binary, and you say, you're no longer saying cool abuelo or cool abuela. You say cool abuele.
And for those that might not speak Spanish or a romantic language, the parallel to this is the discussion right now in English over pronouns. I think is probably a fair way to say a parallel, and like why things are either inclusive or non-inclusive, and how language adapts to that. So that's kind of what this is. But
to clarify a little bit, I guess there's a lot of people who say, well, I don't like using the X. I don't identify with that. Well, then you don't have to use it for yourself.
Right.
But I think one of the most basic, decent things we can do as human beings is refer to people the way they want to be referred to.
Absolutely.
So if I'm talking about a group of people, like a community, then I will say Latinx or Latine so that I'm inclusive. But if I'm talking about myself, I identify as a man, so I'll say Latino.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, that got sidetracked. We were saying goodbye to Terry. But anyway, you can search on Vox.com for Terry's name and check out both comics. I think there's both Latino versus Hispanic and Latino versus Latinx, is right?
They're called You Say Latino and called You Say Latinx.
Right. And then in the coming months, look for, or maybe more coming year, Lifetime Passes coming out from Abrams and Shirley Titles. And Terry, thank you for coming on the show. It is delightful talking to you. I hope you'll come back and join us at some point.
Anytime.
And for those that are not familiar with Terry's work, head over to his website or check him out on Instagram and Twitter. And Terry, thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Terry.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Dave, we've got a question from our $5 Patreon backers this week on ComicLab, and I think you're going to love it. You ready for this?
Let's do it.
All right. So this one comes in from Curious Borg, who says, "Hi, Brad and Dave. Your recent conversation about art school and dealing with people you've met in person versus online got me thinking. Both of you were easing into a mostly post-convention stage of your career, even before COVID. Are you still forming new friendships and partnerships, or mostly working with the same old group of people? If you keep..." Yeah, I noticed he put that in there too. "If you keep to your bubble, is there a risk of getting to the state in your career or getting too stale in your career or business practices? Hopefully my question won't make you go boo. As always, thanks for the great podcast. I'm proud to be a patron." So, Dave, the question is, do you two old guys ever meet anyone new?
Hey, Grandpa, do you ever get out of your recliner? That's what this question is. Hey, Grandpa, do you ever get off the porch and go down to the market to meet some of the young kids?
Do you ever leave the home? And I'm not talking about those times you wander off and can't find your way back again. Do you ever leave the porch?
Hey, Brad, let me ask you, Grandpa, now that Grandma has passed, do you ever go down to the dining hall at the old folks' home and try to meet new people? Brad, do you ever pad down there with your walker and try to find someone new to talk to?
Dave, the home called. They said that you forgot to sign out again, and if you could just...
They're sending a squad car around to look for you.
And yes, Dave, we do know that you can remember when this was all farms. We get that. Just get to the part when you come back and sign back in. Your tapioca's waiting for you.
Brad, you know it's Thursday, and I like to walk to the market to get my lottery ticket. Bradley, you know this about me. I don't have to sign out. I'm an adult.
Yeah, it's Thursday. That's when the Entenmann truck comes over. That's when you can get fresh baked goods.
Thursday is also lasagna day, and I don't like the lasagna. It has chunks of meat in it. I always liked meatless lasagna, and I don't like it the way they prepare. Anyway, so as an old guy, do I ever meet new friends? I will be honest about this. So I have, and I think it's fair to say, an interesting mix of social and antisocial aspects to my personality, right? Mm-hmm. I'm also incredibly gregarious in a group. I will literally, if you put me in a party atmosphere, I'm the loudest and the most outgoing and delightful, right? I say that intentionally.
Loudest and outgoing, definitely.
This has been ComicLab, everybody. I'm going to go cry in a corner.
2 out of 3 ain't bad.
No, I will say this about myself, that put me in a party situation, I'm great. Yeah. I'm out. But you give me the choice about whether I can choose to be at home by myself or choose to be in a group. And man, as my wife will attest, 9 times out of 10, I will choose to be at home. Yes. Even if it's an incredible event. I'm like, I'd rather not see people. I'm gonna be by myself, right? And there's a reason why I became a cartoonist, and it's because as social as I could be in high school and college, I liked being alone. I liked cartooning, and that's okay. I've very much come to accept that about my personality. But anyway, as far as friendships, I will be honest that I've made a lot of my personal and professional friendships in my 20s and maybe into my 30s. And then I kind of stopped for about a decade or 15 years, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know why this is the case, but something, Brad, about the Black Lives Matter movement has made me realize that I need to widen my sphere again. Does that make sense? And I don't know why it's a part of me is part and parcel probably of an awareness that of a new need for self-improvement is also no, I need to actively seek out younger voices in my career. And so it's a shame actually that Comic-Con is not happening for 1,000 reasons, but mainly because I was kind of hoping to do an Australian walkabout and walk the floor and find new people, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do, and if you ever get the chance to go to Emerald City Comic Con, walk the Artist Alley at Emerald City Comic Con. It is one of the uniquely best artist alley in North America.
Mhm.
And you will find among the best, you'll find Hellboy tabling right next to, I'm blanking on the guy that drew Hellboy. What's his name, Brad? Come on, help me
Mike
out.
Mignola.
Mike Mignola, that's right. Jake Parker's going to kill me that I forgot that name. You'll find Mike tabling right next to somebody who's doing their first ash can, but
Sure.
who is amazing because it's a curated artist alley. And what I'm getting at is I have met a lot of my favorite younger cartoonists at Comic-Con.
Yeah.
And I personally find that to be a wonderful chance to turn that switch that my personality has from antisocial to social, to say, for these 4 days, Brad, I'm going to actively try to meet new people, actively hear what their journey is like. And so that's my truth right now. Where are you, Brad, in terms of making friends? Now, I don't know that I would describe you as a person who has friends, right? Is
No.
that fair to...
No,
I was kidding.
by
I
choice.
was kidding, but you said yes. Oh my God, that hurt me when you said yes because I was joking. Oh God, that hurt me. I'm taking back, Brad. You have a lot of dear friends. I'm sorry. No,
I'm kidding, of course. But no. So I want to reframe this question because it sounds like the question was mostly about business.
Oh,
Not so much social. It was like, is your business relationships going to go stale? And creative?
yeah.
But I so yes, socially, I'm kind of to that point where there's not the new people coming into my life are mainly through my kids.
Right.
Like
Yes.
it's like
Yeah.
my son has a new girlfriend, or the other son is starting a new D&D group, so I meet this one and I meet that one and so forth. And you get a chance to sit. Well, in the old days, you could sit at the dining room table and have a conversation. Now it's a little bit tougher to do, unless like my 18-year-old is trying to FaceTime with his girlfriend, and Dad, comes in and peeks his head through the door and starts saying all kinds of embarrassing, cringeworthy things. Then
that sounds like you.
If you call that socialization, I do that lots.
Yeah.
But in terms of business, no, most of I've got a lot of new people that are cycling in. Asia was here for my internship last summer, and I'm still in pretty frequent contact with her as she's going through and kind of trying to get herself settled as an artist. She wants to be a storyboard artist out in California, so she's trying to make inroads, and I'm trying to give her the help that I can give. Abiomi came in as an assistant. Kathleen was an assistant. I've got a number of different people that mainly through my connections at University of the Arts come in and cycle through my business and through my creative atmosphere. So I get a chance to hear them, and believe me, I need it because one of the first things I'm always asking is, all right, explain Instagram to me. Because it's an ongoing an ongoing quest for me to find the key to making Instagram work for me. And so I always get these great takes on different pathways for Instagram and social media in general. So yeah, I've got an awful lot of young people and fresh blood, if you will, coming through and taking part in different areas of my creative process. So no, I'm kind of happy with my ability. Could there be more? Absolutely. I think that goes without saying. To a certain extent, at some point, I just have to put my head down and get back to work too. But I don't know. I would bet that based on the question that was asked, if this person actually saw the number of people that I'm actually in conversation with throughout a given month, it would probably be kind of surprising.
Yeah, yes, that's true. I think one of the things that's a hallmark of trying to make a career in business is the recognition, at least for Brad and I, that we can't allow ourselves to get too comfortable or too stale. And every 3 or 4 or 5 years, we have a kind of like an old 1880s revival where they're like, gotta change it up, gotta switch it up, gotta like sometimes it's just you get this fear of God and you like, no, I'm getting too stale. I'm working the same way I've always worked. Gotta change it up. And so for me, one of the things that Brad and I have been talking about, and I don't think it's talking out of school to mention it early, is we would like to do as a way of paying it forward, a mentorship of some type to 2 or 3 younger cartoonists. And part of it is because we're trying to be better active citizens. And we don't, by the way, we don't have the details of this worked out yet. So I'm not,
in other words, don't at us.
don't at us yet. Yeah. We're trying to figure this out, but we're trying to figure out, especially again, in context of Black Lives Matter, of how to pay it forward to make the world a better place. And part of it was Brad and I saying, how can we do a really meaningful mentorship that might say, like, listen, you'll have access to Brad and I, and you can key questions about what to do in the first couple of years of your career. And I personally, even though that's giving back and paying it forward, I think is a better way to say it, paying it forward to the next generation. I look forward to the energy of young 20-somethings in terms of like, what's interesting to you in cartooning right now? Like, what are you reading? Because I, at my age, and God, Brad at his age especially, just who knows what Brad's still like, I'm still reading Jane Eyre and it's fantastic.
At this point my eyes have gotten so weak. I have to have my attendant read it to me.
Yes. Yeah.
As they're pushing my wheelchair down the hallway.
Read that passage about Sherlock Holmes again. What I'm getting at is that the nice thing about bringing new artists and new blood into your studio or into your career is that, like Terry was saying, it's also a lovely give and take. It's new blood, it's new ideas, it's new energy, it's new excitement. Like, for example, my niece and members of my family have been introducing me to different types of manga that I just they were not in my sphere, right? And it's exciting to come across a title that I had not heard of, and like I probably wouldn't have found on my own, but because a 20-something brought it into my life, I'm like, this is great. I'm going to read it. I'm going to try it out.
This is something that's happened to me as well. Although for me it's anime. But tell me what the 2 titles you're most excited about are.
There's a couple one. There's and now I'm blanking on the title, but it's called Dungeon. What is it?
Dungeons and Dragons.
No, don't be a jerk. It's not
I'm
that.
Sorry.
Now you're putting me on the spot. But one of them is a manga about chefs in a dungeon, and it's really a cute idea. It's sort of all ages, but I love the idea of like they're killing the monster, right? And then they cook it. They just describe how they prepare the beast as a meal.
That's a fantastic concept.
And it just seems like a fun idea and one that I never would have thought out.
How does one prepare kobold?
Yeah, exactly. So stuff like that, just titles that I would not have considered. And I feel bad that I'm actually blanking on the title right now because it would be fun to share with people. But go ahead, Brad. You had a
While we were out at the lake house waiting for the house to get finished, we had Hulu there. And I've been holding off on Hulu for a while, partially because at the one level you still get advertisements, and I'm really against paying a subscription for something and getting advertisements on top of it. And I understand there's a higher level that you can get rid of that as well. But the other part was I cut the cable TV years ago, and I started seeing like Netflix and stuff, and I think I've said it on this show. Eventually, they're going to have us with so many of these subscription services. I'm going to be paying as much as I used to pay for cable, just as with all the. So I've been trying to put the skids on it. We got Netflix, Amazon Prime. We had to get CBS All Active so we could watch Picard. We got Disney Plus, and we can't get rid of that because Hamilton's coming up. And so the kids are like, we got to get Hulu. And I said, I don't know that there's enough on Hulu to really tempt us. And so my sons go, well, they got this thing called My Hero Academia. I said,
My Hero Academia is great.
What's that? I said.
You've not watched it? Okay,
oh my God. Ahead. When I was teaching one of my storytelling classes, some of my students who knew that I was a cartoonist said, you got to watch it. You'd love it. And actually, I bought one of the, you ready for Old Man Geiger?
Yeah.
Bought one of the manga The first chapter,
Yep.
but Dave, you got to read this shit backwards. It starts at the back of the book. You got to read
Oh
the
my
right-hand
God,
page.
Grandpa, come on.
It threw
Grandpa,
me so. You got to
have you
read.
never read a manga before?
You've got to read the stuff backwards. You got to constantly, remind yourself to start in the upper right-hand corner of the.
Ladies and gentlemen, Brad is now doing the Mel Brooks bit of a 1,000-year-old man. I have to read it backwards. What's happening? My lasagna has chunks of meat in it, and I don't like it.
It threw me so much. So I got through the first couple pages and like, now watch the anime. So the kids got me completely. I wish I was making that up.
Writing at you with your reading glasses on and your comfortable reading chair going, wait a minute, why is the title on the back of the book?
And I told you on the show before, reading puts me right out. After 2 pages, I'm drooling on my shirt. I go so right out like a light.
I wish I could have been a fly on the wall by the time you got to page 3 and you're like, this is hard to do.
I had to put a little post-it note at the top of the page with an arrow, this way stupid.
Let's stop for a second because I want to talk about how there are no new stories. Because to me, My Hero Academia is the perfect example of take the X-Men, completely recontextualize it.
Yep.
You've got My Hero Academia, and it. Go ahead.
Put what do I always say? Crank so much original thought into it that it's indistinguishable. So instead of calling them mutants, what do they call it? They say they've got a quirk.
A quirk, yeah.
You're born with a quirk.
Which, by the way, great terminology.
Oh, that word. When they said quirk, I'm like, whoa. It was one of those things like, you fucking idiot, Geiger. Why didn't you think of that?
I know.
It's such a beautiful way to phrase it. But it's a really great animated series. And then, so we watch, 5 or 6 episodes of that. And then my 18-year-old says to me, you think that's good? Wait till and he clicks. And I'm like, what's that? Cowboy Bebop. I've heard of this. I've heard of Cowboy Bebop. He says, have you ever seen it? I go, no. He goes, buckle up. Click. Now we're watching Cowboy Bebop, which is a whole nother kind of amazing, a lot less comedy, a lot more serious. It's more action, but a lot of great, kind of jazz influence there, as you might guess by the name. And now we're watching that. And then, well, this goes back to Netflix. We get home and the kids are so excited about watching anime together. Guess what's on Netflix that old man Geiger just discovered that he loves?
I'm guessing Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, no, that was last month. We made it through the entire series, which is also, we got to talk about sometime, amazingly good too. But this thing that I completely dismissed because I thought, what a dumb idea. And it's really handled well. One Punch Man. One Punch Man is deceptively good.
And did you read the manga or are you watching the anime?
What do you think?
Because I'm still delighting in Grandpa sitting in his chair going, I'm having trouble reading backwards. My brain doesn't know how to process this. I'm so old, everyone. So very old.
And the irony is I'm getting so deaf that to watch TV, I've got to have the subtitles on. So I'm reading anyway.
Oh, God. Oh, no, Brad. Oh, my heart is... talk about things falling apart.
It ain't easy. Just pass me the drool cup and put me out to pasture. But no, I've been really, and speaking of being turned on to new things by the younger people around you, those are 4 things right there that in the last 2 months I've really gotten excited about. And again, so what that did was one of the things that that became crystal clear to me watching My Hero Academia is that I need to be looser with superpowers. Like, think about my cast. One person is a fire starter. One person can project lightning and electricity. There's somebody who's super strong. There's superpowers or quirks in My Hero Academia that are just off the wall and
just bonkers.
Nuts.
Just bonkers.
Like one person's superpower is he can project adhesive tape.
The one superpower, her quirk is she's got like these plugs that come out of her calf and go like earphones kind of thing.
Yeah.
That one is cuckoo bananas. Like what what were they smoking when they thought of that one? I was like, what is this?
And they do group shots, and you see some people have bizarre heads. One person looks like he's got a clothespin for a head.
The one with the hand on the face is
that's
a brilliant design.
Yeah, and me again, one of those. Why didn't I think of that? That's
my wife
creepy.
who doesn't read comics walked in and was like, "What is that? That's cool."
That the whole idea, their mask is their hand, and he's walking around like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's super scary.
That's
scarier than a ghost mask. That's a super scary mask.
It's great.
So yeah, I've been
this is
really
two old guys
grooving
describe
on this.
manga. That's what this section is.
Yeah,
great. Everyone's enjoying this one. Listen to Grandpa describe a manga, and they have a guy with a hand on his face. That's what I sound like. This is what I sound like right now.
Well,
and I tell you what, there's a girl that has plugs in her calves, and she can, that's musical based. And
well, listen, before we both just turn to dust, let's see if we can get one more useful question out of us before it's too late.
But to put a button on that question, though, the thing is, of course, you have years of like, it's like a field. Some years the field goes fallow, and so some years you're just plugging away, you're working. And then other years you're like, no, I need to actively make this field better, right? And so you throw a lot of fertilizer on it and stuff. And so I think both Brad and I have had periods of both going fallow and then producing and then fallow producing.
Yeah.
And right now I'm in the phase where I'm actively trying to expand my reading list and my horizon and the people in it and the people I do business with. And so to answer your question, there are seasons of that. And right now my season is I'm trying to expand the people and the things in my sphere, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Turn.
Yes.
To everything there is a season. I've got one more question for you, David.
Yes.
This comes in from a new Patreon backer, Big Fish. I love that name, Big Fish. Your studio is called Small Fish Studios.
Small Fish
right?
is the name of my studio. Yeah. And do you know why it's called Small Fish?
Why?
Small fish, big pond.
Ah.
That's the idea of it, is that I'm just a little dude making my way in comics, which is a much bigger pond, so I'm a small fish studio.
Yeah. Well, this guy's Big Fish. He's getting ready to gobble your studio right up. And Big Fish says, what are good proportions / dimensions for a webcomic that would allow easy printing?
Oh, okay. This is a great question.
We get this question all the time. What size should my webcomic be?
What works for the web does not always work for print, right?
Right.
And so here's the thing. If you're producing a long form story, it's a very different question than if you're producing individual installments of short form. Mm-hmm. So let's tackle short form first, Brad, right? Mm-hmm. So my advice would be, if you're doing a sequential comic, is to make it reconfigurable. And the closest that I could suggest would be to go towards a perfect square, because perfect squares can be stacked tall in like a column. They can be made into themselves a square, 2 across kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Or you can make them horizontal, like a traditional newspaper comic strip.
Right.
That's one very easy way to do it, because it's very easy to configure for different formats. I would advise against anything too long or too wide, panel-wise, right? Yes, it'll look amazing on the web if you can scroll down and there's this giant scroller, but then just try to imagine putting that on anything relative to a printed page, and you're like, good God, how am I going to do this, Yeah. And so is that a limiting factor to what you can draw? Absolutely. For example, right now I have an idea for a side-scrolling comic that I could do, but I'm like, what will I ever do with this in print? There's nothing I can do with it. So is it a limiter? Yes, but then you apply your creativity to it. You can say, how do I make this idea work within the context of an eventual printed page? And then you draw accordingly. So I personally would advise towards a square. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Well, here's the deal. I've got two thoughts. Number one, just you're mentioning short form sequential. I always get really peeved when I see somebody posting a comic strip on social media. In other words, like a 3-panel or a 4-panel strip on social media without reformatting it into a square. And you can even do that with a 3-panel strip. You go 2 panels on top and 1 centered on the bottom. But I get really peeved when I see somebody go like 4 panels across.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I tried to ignore you for the last
I absolutely
10 seconds.
derailed the podcast because I had made a really nice French press of coffee today. I don't know if you've ever had this, but you get to the bottom of the last sip of the coffee and you just get a mouthful of coffee grinds.
Yeah.
And it's all, for some reason, it's all underneath my, oh God, still, it's underneath my tongue and in my teeth. And I'm trying not to distract you by trying to extricate it from my mouth.
I'm doing this podcast, and all of a sudden I look over at Dave, and he's licking his palm and making all kinds of faces. And
I can't get it out of my mouth. It's like stuck in my mouth.
God.
No one wants to hear this. This is the least appetizing thing possible. Sorry to derail the show.
Well, what I was going to say is I get really upset when I see somebody posting a comic strip on social media because it's so easy to reformat that into the type of thing that can easily be read on a small screen. If you do a strip, somebody's got to pinch and zoom that thing. Then they got to scroll all the way to the left. Then they've got to scroll it as they read it. That's way more than anybody wants to do to read your stuff. They want to click and boom, there it is. And if you've done it, like Dave said, formatted into a square, you're home free. You've gotten the first step towards making a new reader, which is getting them to read it. But I want to go backwards now.
Okay.
And that is, what is the best size for a webcomic? And you were kind of in the hunt on this one, but I want to cut right to the chase on this and say the best size for a webcomic is whatever size you plan to print that at.
Oh, what an unhelpful answer. Great job, Brad.
No, it is. In other words,
I know.
You
work backwards is what you're saying.
You have to, because that number one, it's the most important thing. That's where most of your money is going to come in from your print, right? Either books or what have you.
Agreed.
That's where the money is being made. Okay. So that's got to be your most important thing. And also, no matter what you do for print, for the most part, you can reformat that and crop out panel by panel by panel. As long as you don't have a super horizontal panel, like Dave said, for the most part, you can just crop those panels individually and reformat them in any number of different ways. And boom, you can post it on the web. You can post it on social media. Sometimes just take a look at all the different formats I post Evil Ink on. I post it as a half page. I post it as a panel by panel vertical scroll. I post it as a panel by panel horizontal scroll on Instagram. I post it as a video that goes through each different panels.
Right.
And that's thirsty, all the same page that I'm working backwards from. But the page is the most most important thing. So what you really should do is do some planning. What size book do I eventually hope to put out? Once you decide that, and like Dave always says, go cool hunting, right? Go to the bookstore or go to the library and see what are some sizes that you've got to choose from. For some reason, I got hooked up into like an 8.5 by 11 size, and for better or for worse, that's what all my books have been.
Yeah.
But there's also digest size, there's graphic novel size, there's manga size, there's a size that a lot of comic strips are put out at, like those Fireside and Garfield collections.
That's mine. Like 8.5 by 9 is what those are.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of choices. That should be your first step because that's got the least flexibility and it's got the most important. And once you figure that out, everything else comes out in the wash.
Let me reinforce that point. When Brad says cool hunting, what you're doing is, and granted it's hard at the moment with the pandemic, but you're physically feeling the books. What feels right to crack this open and read it? Because I don't know if you've ever read a certain kind of comic book where you crack it open to read it and it's too wide. You'd have to like have it on your lap or have it on a table. You can't hold it, right? And then the alternate is true. Sometimes you get a book that's too tall and thin and you're like, this feels weird. It doesn't read right. Yeah. So I know this feels weird, but it is a sort of intuitive thing. Like you'll know it when you pick it up. This is the size I want to have my book feel like, right?
Yes.
So Brad's right about that. And then work backwards. So I design my drive pages for that 8.5 by 9 size that I print at. And then, like Brad said, I take that physical page dimension and just bring it down to whatever it is. I think right now it's 800 pixels wide, and ideally I'd like to move that up to 1,000 or 1,200 pixels wide. The screen resolutions are improving at such a point now where it's time for me to up it in the new design of the drivecomic.com webpage. So I in the next iteration, I'm going to be making it wider, but I think anything around 1,000 pixels is fine as a minimum. I think at this point, what do you think, Brad?
I have been prepping all of my stuff for 1,600 pixels wide.
Oh, have you?
Yep.
On evil-comic.com?
Yep. Because I know that's a little bit big, but I know that resolutions are only going to go up.
Yeah.
So it's big enough that I can easily have plenty of resolution for Instagram, which is about 1,000 or I think 1,080 pixels wide. It's certainly enough for Webtoons, which is 800 pixels wide. But yeah, I centered on 1,600. I forget even where I pulled that out of a hat. Because it's low enough where it's not kind of ridiculous, and high enough where I've got enough that I know I'm going to be pretty good for the next few years.
Right, and we're only a handful of years away from very affordable 4K screens. Right now they're a little out of reach for the average family, but we're just a couple years away from that being pretty affordable. And the problem then will be, Brad, how much resolution is too much, in the sense that I'm always able to advertise my books as the crispest and clearest way to read my comics.
Yeah.
But as you know, with certain pro level iPads and stuff, you can actually have a better pixel resolution than you can have a print resolution on certain products.
Yeah.
At 4K, and so especially, and then in the years ahead as we get into 8K. Oh, go ahead. You had a thought,
Dave. I got one. You mentioned 4K screens. You know what Yoda said the first time he saw himself in 4K?
I'm ducking out immediately. I don't want to hear this punchline. What did Yoda say as soon as he saw himself in 4K?
HDMI.
You've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living.
HDMI. That's a freaking brilliant joke. HDMI. Yoda said it.
Did you come up with that?
No. My kid found it on Reddit and threw it at me at the dining room table, and I loved it.
That is very clever. That's very clever for the fact that it works.
It's clever because it came from my kid. If I would have told you I made it up, you would have put the old stink on it.
I was going to give you credit for it, the cleverness of that. I think that's great. I think that pretty much buttons up that answer, but
I just took away Dave's will to live. Now
that I've been deflated like a sail in a windless ocean, I'm just like, no, it's fine.
But I do to button it up. I think first you look at your print and because that's where your money is going to be made.
Absolutely, yeah. So then
retrofit your website.
That I 1,000% agree with Brad, especially if you're starting in on a project that is of length. If you know you're going to be doing this for multiple years, don't just wing it. Make sure you find a page width and a height and again a resolution that works for your printed page first, and then work backwards. I think that's smart.
Absolutely. And on that note, it's my pleasure to tell you that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my close personal friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
Do you like how I called you a creator and not a cartoonist?
That.
Because to Terry's point, the smallest thing we can do as humans is call one another what we want to be called.
Right.
And if you want to be called a creator, Brad, even though I think of you still as a cartoonist, I'm going to call you a creator.
Thank you. Thank you for realizing my truth.
Yes, I know. In all seriousness, if that's what you want to be called, I think that's actually a great word. And so I recognize that's. You know what it is? There's still, for me, there's a sentimental joy in cartoonist. Oh, well, let's talk about this for a second. To me, there's a sentimental joy in cartoonist, and I still revel in being called a cartoonist.
I don't mind being called a cartoonist, but when you say that you're the cartoonist of Sheldon, that's a chewy phrase that doesn't have any. I know. It's got the wrong poetry.
You know what? Too, creator also. We talked about this before, but creator also implies a certain ownership of creativity. Like you were the one. It spawned from you. You were the one that brought it into the world,
right, Right.
Because you could be a cartoonist on SpongeBob, and you're like number 32 on the call sheet, Anyway, all that being said, the ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net, and this episode and all episodes was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions. over at www.woodsong.media. And this week's sponsor for the show is Wacom at wacom.com. We thank them, the makers of the new Wacom One.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode like this one. Dave, you gotta hear this. We got this one in from CCAD student.
Okay.
CCAD, that's got to be an art and design college, right? CCAD?
Yeah, I would imagine art and design, yeah.
Yeah. Boy, nice way for us to thank this person. We're like, oh yeah, it must be at some college somewhere. But anyway, this person says, great insights, great hosts. A must-listen for webcomics creators and a helpful resource for the larger community of artists looking to make a living on their creative talents. Dave and Brad have tons of advice on a weekly variety of topics, and their cheerful friendship is a joy to listen in on.
Wow, that's nice. That's very nice.
That comes in from CCAD student, and I gotta say, that completely brightened my day. So thank you so much.
And did you notice the use of the phrase cheery friendship? So see, you do have a friend, Brad. You have at least one friend.
Well, I've got two now. I've got you, and I've got our new friend from the Columbus College of Art and Design.
You know what? Look at that. The thoughtfulness that Brad took, like the Flash using the Speed Force. He went and checked out what CCAD is, the Columbus College of Art and Design. All right. Well, and also thank you for the kind words. That does mean a lot to Brad and I, and it helps the show rankings in the algorithms with Apple anytime you rate and review the show. So thank you for doing that. And of course, ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/ComicLab.
Dave, what if Thanos had said, I can wipe out half of all humanity in a flash?
And then it's a crossover event with DC.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Now you've got to get DC's lawyers involved. Marvel's got to get out there. There's a whole copyright dispute. Actually, the copyright lawyers would walk in, stop all of the action. Everybody would get to live another couple of years until they worked all out.
What if I just thought of a funny one? What if Thanos is like, as soon as I'm able to lose a few pounds and get this belt down one notch, I'm gonna snap half the, and they're like, no, have this delicious donut, Thanos. No, Thanos.
You remember those Hostess cupcakes ads that were in the middle of comic books?
Yes.
That reads like one of those. As soon as I lose a few pounds, I'm going to wipe out half of humanity. And it's like, well, try one of these Hostess fruit pies.
Well, because you know how we were saying from a storytelling point, you need a physicality, you need a physical event to trigger the storytelling moment.
Yeah.
Like you see him trying to notch the belt one more time, and they're like, no! Here, and you just see Thor diving with Ben and Jerry's, aiming for Thanos' mouth. Like, no!
Luckily, the day was saved by Ant-Man and Chunky Monkey.